Good evening. Welcome to the City Council Ordinance Subcommittee, July 16th, 5:20. Looks like we're all here. I don't think we have any meetings to approve. I mean, minutes to it.
I don't have any from the last one yet. I wasn't at the one I was at last, and I didn't. Did one of you go do minutes from that other one?
No, not yet. So.
No, but I mean, you don't. Do you want me to watch the?
No, you don't have. I mean,
yeah.
I can do it and just write it up. It's easy.
Okay.
Anybody here to speak of anything that's not on the agenda?
Of course, since we don't have a piece of paper that says the agenda.
Would you like to say? Yeah, Ned, you can.
I can speak about anything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of a loaded question.
Okay. Yeah, you can't stop me anyway.
Yeah.
Annette Siegel, Mutter Street. Okay, so I know what it's concerning you. Okay, when I saw the news on last Wednesday night that you were being, vetted by Springfield to have, I said, perfect, you've got a place that really is gonna be good for your vehicle. And I said, great, I'm very happy for you. And then the next night I saw the article in the paper and I said, I take offense with you bashing my city. Okay, and I just didn't like that at all.
Okay.
We're a good city, I've been here forever. My father was from the city.
I didn't bash Easthampton. Well, we could talk
You
about
did.
Oh, let's keep
I'm
that.
not gonna just, I just want to say, I took offense with what you had said about how doing business with Easthampton is a mess, so anyways, I was happy that Springfield would like to have you there, but now it's like, go.
Okay, all right. Can I have my agenda back? Thanks. All right, so on to business. So we have the ordinance that you submitted originally. Peg and I worked on it, and
Oh, you're talking about the quadricycle one?
Quadricycle ordinance.
Oh, okay.
And so I don't know if you wanted to talk about that at all. I know that Barbara had sent us some feedback that I thought would make sense to. Did you see Barbara's? Okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to let you have put some thoughts out about what you think about that, and then maybe look at the parts that Barbara had specifically asked about.
Yeah, I think so. I'll go back a little bit. So I gave you that ordinance because I told this body that I would write up what a permitting ordinance would look like. I made a promise in a public hearing, and I said I'd do that. I think that there's an ongoing kind of complexity around this topic, and I think that a discussion about permitting almost is like putting the horse before the cart, so to speak, in terms of some of the broader discussions that are going on around this vehicle. I'm concerned kind of what will happen if this goes to the city council. In other words, so if we were to discuss this and vote yes, it still doesn't answer a lot of questions about use and application on our streets mostly, right? We still have some discussions, I think, around the application on the handrail trail. So I don't have any particular concerns per se other than that. I mean, I think that there's listings in there about, I mean, obviously I agree with what Barbara had to say about who would grant this permit. I think there's things in there about routes. I'd say going back about 50 steps about that, from the start, I think that in terms of how I've gone about this is to try to work with guidance from our law enforcement department. And I think that especially when it pertains to something that involves enforcement in vehicles, that I have to seek guidance from those who would have any new vehicle would have the biggest impact on. That's our police. So I would defer to the chief in terms of how he feels our streets would look with a vehicle like this operating on it. I have significant concerns because I think that in many of the municipalities where vehicles like this operate, there's typically two-lane streets, there's some sort of downtown business district, there is a built-in municipal infrastructure where vehicles like this can operate. My other concern too is that it looks like, but I might be wrong, I did a little bit of research, and cities that grant ordinances for these vehicles already have state legislation. So they've been legislated on the state level, and this kind of goes back to the discussion about guidance from DOT, et cetera. And then the individual municipalities basically opt in or opt out with some language that incorporates basically their Department of Motor Vehicles allowing these. Now, I don't know if that's a sticky wicket for us, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Sure.
I'll let you guys discuss that. I actually have a completely alternative ordinance I'd like to just submit for the public record around this too. I think in regards to some of the conversations I've had with the community about this. I think in regards to that, there's still a lot of questions that aren't answered, in terms of, well, let's just say we have a permitting process. What if it's permitted, but there's nowhere they can operate?
Well, I guess we can catch you up, because as we discussed that, I think like all of those things that you talked about.
Why do I need to be caught up?
No, not you.
Oh.
We can catch up.
I was here.
I know. I think one of the most important things to recognize here is we specifically added a stipulation of the permit was to have a route that was designated. So I think that if we created what a potential route could be, that these were allowed, then that would mitigate, I think, a lot of what you were just saying, like it being on streets in places where it might not be. And so I think that piece of it is an important piece.
Right.
It's not like this isn't a free.
Oh, I understand that.
Right.
No, I know there's that specific.
And then I think,
yeah.
and I think one of the reasons why we took this and tried to refine it was because without it, then what guidance is there? Without an ordinance that specifically regulates this type of vehicle, there is no regulation for this type of vehicle. And so then we fall back into a gray area of murkiness, of interpretation, of I think that's an important thing to recognize here. So as we look at this, for example, let's say we felt like a route that made sense was from the Easthampton border by Arcadia, where the little bridge is that goes over to the cornfields and the Oxbow Marina. We said that road to Fort Hill, past Joe's house, down to the bike path, and that one section where there's a wide shoulder to the mills and to the mill parking lot was an allowable place for it to be used. Mm-hmm. I think that if we determined that made sense, if we said, oh, that route has roads that are wide enough, is non-traveled, would serve the purpose of then that could be the designated route. Mm-hmm. So it wouldn't be like we were trying to squeeze something on Cottage Street or Main Street or Union Street that didn't fit because if we didn't feel like that was a fit.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh, of course that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, can I ask our law enforcement official here a question? So this vehicle goes approximately 3 miles per hour. That's correct, Nick? Are there roads in the city that you think it wouldn't be an issue to have a large four-wheel traveling vehicle traveling 3 miles an hour in regards to both safety and traffic congestion?
And time of day.
And time of day.
So my question, you're gonna have to catch me up too. So your meeting with Barb, was there a specific route, or was this just language to create?
It would be, there would have to be a route specifically identified in order for a permit to be granted.
So it's permitting, okay.
Yep.
But she didn't want to be the permit.
And she doesn't want to be the permit, so you'd probably default as the permit granting authority.
Of course I would.
Because you have nothing else to do.
So there's a lot of variables, like that's a whole other meeting. There's a lot of variables in which is why I guess it's part of the permitting process, right? Where this thing would go. And I will involve public safety if I handle my police officers deem necessary, particularly by way of traffic obstruction and that's what I will hang my hat on the road for sure. And as far as the rail trail goes, until the city council decides to change that ordinance, the interpretation of that law will be mine. So you know, you guys write the ordinance, I enforce it, but our interpretation, like several different laws, is why we have an SJC and a court who then decide the interpretation of law. So I get, part of me fully expected at some point, if this is gonna persist in the manner it was going, that we would wind up in court after we wind up citing and or towing. We'd wind up at a court, then a judge who's supposed to rule on the balances of law and what your ordinance currently says or doesn't say. It'd be his interpretation that would rule the land. So that being said, my position hasn't changed at all since my last letter to Nick. That's where I stand on the current ordinances, so I think that's, you know, this body's job to obviously either leave it or write something else, or but I'd be cautious in writing, or, well, maybe I'm not gonna caution on anything, but as a taxpayer, I would say I'd be cautious on writing ordinance around one specific entity, as it does or doesn't benefit the city.
Right. Well, I mean, I think
so
to address like one specific, I mean, this potentially could be a class of business
right.
that comes to the city. So I think
and
while this is a catalyst, I think this is
well, and I don't
potentially an umbrella.
And I don't disagree that it's just for commercial use, because you could get, you know, a group of people who, like, you know, we're gonna buy one of these things and we're just gonna run the thing around town, not commercial.
Well, if we
So it's not
stipulate,
specific to commercial use
but if we
either.
stipulate in here that it's for commercial use only, that's the answer to that, which I think we did. Say it was for commercial quadricycle, one permit for a commercial quadricycle.
Yeah.
So my other question too is, do we have the authority as a municipality to create our own class of vehicle?
I don't see why not.
I mean, that's a question for probably the DOT and the RMV, right? I mean, I don't know if we have authority to do that. I don't know. And I'm not saying, oh, well, we can't do this because we don't. I'm like, I don't have the answer to that.
I mean, I can say just like based on other things that we've classified. You know, we've classified different types of signs that we specifically classified. Our language classified them in a specific way. I mean, I think within our ordinances, we have the right to make definitions as we see fit.
I don't know about that. I
mean,
a lot
past
of
practice, we have.
Well, I know past practice, but I think that in regards to, there's probably certain things that within the GL, you have liberties to classify on the municipal level, and there's certain things in the GL where there's either superseding either definitions or law, or you just can't do it whatsoever. I don't have the answer to that. I think that's a valuable question, just in regards to.
Like an example would be.
Well, this. Right? I mean, like, can a municipality make up their own vehicle laws? I mean, don't we default to the RMV? I just don't know. I think.
I would say, I mean, just historically, I would say we have that authority to create an ordinance that has a definition of something that exists, that we see existing in our community. I would, Joe, what do you think on that?
I would think so. And doesn't Chicopee have something?
Yeah, well, and I was gonna go the other way with it. I think what I've experienced, or what I've seen in other municipalities, more than specifically ordinancing a particular, or welcoming a particular vehicle, I see it the other way. I see that they see this vehicle, this is what Chicopee did, and I know Springfield and Oil are having problems with those little pocket rockets. So they see a vehicle that exists, and they write an ordinance to ban the vehicle that's, I don't know where the definition comes from, which I guess is the crux of this conversation. But they write them, you know, they go the other way. They wind up writing ordinances to ban something that's new or came in or is causing, you know, a ruckus.
When those little motorcycles, is that what you're talking about? Those little tiny gas-powered motorcycles?
Or the
years ago, they were like
the motorized scooters. Motorized scooters, yeah.
Yeah, and same thing to some degree with they're having problems with dirt bikes too, to some degree.
And I would say, just as another point of clarification on the scope of how our authority to create classes of vehicles, like I know for a fact that communities, municipalities have been creating classifications of vehicles that didn't previously exist for electric scooters, that like Lime scooters, where they come in and they drop all these scooters, and they're creating ordinances that specifically address those electric scooters, which previously had never existed before.
Right, and I've read a lot of those, because I know that's also that's something that's come down the pike. But again, like, is there overarching predefined definitions for those already, and they're just, I think it's an important question to know.
Okay.
I mean, again, like if tomorrow we wanted to sit, like, have our own definition for cars or other motorized vehicles, are you saying we can do that as a municipality?
Well, I mean, how would you change the definition of a car to make it so it doesn't include cars?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's what I'm asking. I just don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if we can make up our own vehicle.
I think until we, I mean,
Yeah.
I think we can operate under the assumption that we can make definitions within our ordinance.
I also think that a lot of the work that we do, there are some questions that we are unable to answer, and that's why we have a city attorney to vet our ordinances, and I would leave this to him. I would say that our job is to write it. His job is to come back and say, yes or no, this is legal, not legal, it aligns, it doesn't align with state law.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we go down that wormhole, nothing will ever get created. So for this, I feel like we can do it, we can define a quadricycle, and then if we all agree on all the particulars around the regulations around that, we hand it over to Mr. Tanner, and it's up to him to say, you guys can't write this ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's fair. Yeah, that's just a question.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
I have the whole it's easier to ask forgiveness.
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah. And have you seen what we wrote up?
No, that's why I'm about it.
So you want me to just?
It's pretty eloquent.
Yeah, very.
So,
do you want me to just?
it's so eloquent, it's like
So
someone
is that
already
not-
did it for you.
So is that not what you handed? It's not.
No, that's
No,
that's
this
not.
is a different, this is the manhand.
Oh, okay.
So so what we did was we defined what the quadricycle was,
Okay.
and we made a comprehensive definition, and then we created. Well, I would say these are things that again Owen put forward, and we kind of took out, added, changed, modified. So the regulations were you can't operate without a permit. It cannot be operated by someone who doesn't have a driver's license or is under 21. It can only operate on designated streets, pathways, or other public ways. May not park on public property. May only allow boarding or exiting of passengers at designated spots. May not operate on sidewalks or other paths for pedestrian use unless otherwise specified. Rides must be prearranged with signed agreements, waivers, etc. available on the vehicle. No commercial quadricycle operator may operate or allow others to operate commercial quadricycle under the influence of alcohol or any other intoxicating substance that may impair safe operation of the vehicle. A commercial quadricycle may not operate with a number of passengers that exceeds the number of usable seats on the vehicle. So it was like the main regulations. And then what we did was we created regulations around its operation. So and so we specified since it was operating on the rail trail, we specified if it was going to operate on the rail trail, the quadricycle driver must pull over and stop when traffic is approaching from both directions. Quadricycle driver must communicate verbally and signal if attempting to pass another trail user. If someone is approaching from the rear and needs to pass, quadricycle driver will slow down and pull over at the first safe section to do so. Music must be kept low when passing, being passed, and there was some question about whether residential areas, because that would be identified in the map of areas where music would have to not be, because that could be a potential problem. Patrons may not drink or smoke on the quadricycle. Each group must have a designated driver or rideshare arranged and confirmed by quadricycle operator if on a brewery tour. So those were like the, as we took all the comment from the public meetings that we had, we tried to say what are the main issues, how do we mitigate those issues if they're mitigatable, and so that's where those came from. And then the rest of it is basically around permitting. So there'd be one permit for the city, only be one permit allowed, similar to the one permission to operate a paddle business on the pond. There's only one allowed.
That's they lease that property, right?
Yes,
For
through
park and
RFP.
rec. Right.
Yeah. But we figured having more than one permit would be, and we talked about like the process there. So if more than one person applied for the permit, how
That was
it
my
would
next
go.
question.
And then so basically they would have to have a bunch of documentations in order to get a permit. There would be fees for the permit, and then the validity would be for 1 year. So that was basically that, and we made, when we were originally doing, I think it was the original one that you submitted was sort of the city clerk as the permitting authority.
Yeah, and it was just to offer some framework, but I mean, I think that,
sorry.
yeah, in no way was, you know, I think it was after we had a much longer discussion.
So you have, and I'm obviously I'm gonna have to digest this because I didn't know this existed. In one part you said that if people are coming forward or behind, you'd have to pull over.
Yep.
But then another section you said you'd have to pull over when safe to do so.
Yeah, so if someone's coming, so if driving down the trail, someone is approaching from the front and someone's approaching from the back, has to stop. Like the vehicle has to wait to move until those parties are passed.
So stop.
Stop.
Okay.
So if front and back stop, someone's approaching from the front, they have to pull over as far as possible and slow down.
So that will dictate the route then, because
Right.
there's not a whole lot of places you're doing that.
Right. So the one thing that I didn't mention, because it's stuck, apologize, frequency and time of operation, 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. Thursday and Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Saturday and Sunday, no more than 2 trips per day. A trip is considered to be a round-trip excursion within the same group of riders.
I have an issue. I'm just saying that in 9 o'clock in September is dark.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still fine?
Well,
Or on the road? Or
Maybe we
on the road?
specify months then.
I mean, we could specify, we didn't specify months, but we figured that, you know, this would take us through the summer and that, you know, a responsible operator wouldn't be out in the dark. I mean, but we could specify when, you know, not being in the dark.
So can we back up a little?
We
Sure.
can do seasonal.
Yeah.
So I don't think this vehicle belongs on the bike path. I think I've done a lot of reflection. I think that there's good argument on multiple levels that having an overly wide vehicle on the bike path restricts people's access, both in terms of people freely using the bike path, application of the commercial vehicle on the bike path, but also, you know, more importantly, people in assisted mobility devices such as wheelchairs. I think that there is concern about ADA accessibility. I think that the bike path should be open to everyone to freely use and not to have to kind of move or get off or get out of someone's way. And I think that this poses a huge issue, and I know that we had some language to discuss that. I would also, just to entertain, you know, this body, and if it would please, you know, everyone here and this council at large, I think this vehicle has caused a lot of controversy and a lot of rifts, both within our legislative body and within the community at large. I think there's a lot of concerns, obviously, about the bike path, but I think there's also significant concerns as it pertains to public safety and safe operation and our infrastructure and how something like this can operate on our roads, that I think there's significant concerns about this being on our roads as well. And so I think that, sure, we could definitely look at routes, but I'm trying to picture a road in our city where this is going to work. I have something I just want you guys to look at. You don't have to vote on it, but it's actually somewhat of a counter ordinance to this. Just that defines this and basically restricts it from operating in Easthampton. Because I think at the end of the day, I think there's some pretty good consensus about operation on a bike path. I think then to extend that to the roads, you're going into safety issues, as well as, and I can read off the kind of the resolution in the beginning, but I think we're already dealing with pedestrian issues, bicycle safety issues, very congested traffic patterns as our city gets more and more busy, and I'm worried about adding kind of another element that might introduce congestion and safety issues to our roads where that already exists. So I could read through this, or you can digest it, because I know that my understanding is, if I'm correct from the last meeting, is that we don't have a public hearing. We're
August.
but that's
So
for
it might be September.
that's for the manhand. We set one for September for the other thing. Is that correct? So August.
What other thing?
Well, the Manhan Rail Trail regulations, this is set for August. So I wanted to discuss that because we have a public hearing on this.
Okay, so hang on, that was just a lot of information without a breath.
I have to go, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right, Nick. So, couple of things. So, I get that you're not for this, and that's your right. Don't vote for it, would be my suggestion. I think that, I think that what this body has to do is entertain both options. We have to look at if it was going to operate, how could it operate safely, and then clearly there is a faction that want no part of it. And so this ordinance, I haven't read it, but I'm assuming it pretty much puts the quash, well, that's fine. I get it. So that would be the counter. So, and I think they're both valid. And I think what we as a body have to do is determine which, or if both, go forward to the city council for their approval.
Fair enough. No, I agree with you.
So I don't, I'm sorry, what?
I was gonna say in public speak.
Right. I mean, I'm not a big fan of it either, but I think we should go through the exercise instead of just saying no. I think we need to go through the conversation, the exercise of what if we were to say yes? What would that look like?
No, that's fair, absolutely, and I don't disagree with that. And I just want to clarify for the record, to flat out say that I don't want this is kind of an oversimplification of kind of a lot of work and research that I've done over many months about how this will impact the city. Because I think that, like, in regards to, you know, my desire for creative business and to foster business in Easthampton, I think it's a great idea. But for me, again, I've probably said this a million times, so, you know, when I sat down and kind of thought about certainly application on the rail trail, but then the streets too, I think it's somewhat of a nightmare, and I'm worried, and I'm trying to imagine, so that's all. That's all I'll say about that. But the other thing I'll say is that what we did vote on last time, so I'm happy to discuss this. We do have a public hearing set for the Manhattan Rail Trail Amendment, so I would like to discuss that at some point today, because Peg, you won't be here. I'm sorry, Councilor Coniff, you won't be here next week.
Oh, what's next week?
Well, we might have another meeting, and so I prefer that if we're gonna have a public hearing.
Next week, I'm in DC.
Okay, so if we're gonna have a public hearing on something, I wanna make sure that we at least have some consensus about that. But I agree with everything you said, and I'm almost, so, yes.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, here's my, you know, I've wavered back and forth on this, and I think that, you know, I think it could potentially, I mean, it could potentially work in a limited capacity on the bike path. I'm not willing to, I don't need to throw down the gauntlet for this. It doesn't concern me if it doesn't go on the bike path. You know, but what I do think would be like aggressive. Like I can understand banning these things if we were going to be looking at an operation that was going to be sending 5 or 6 of these things into our community, and they were going to have free reign over our streets. But I think that if we limit this, and honestly, I think that route that I said, which is from the Oxbow Water Ski Club to Fort Hill to the Mills parking lot is a very, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to tell me that route is disruptive to any sort of meaningful traffic.
So I get confused, are we on the street or on the trail?
On the street.
So is there, because I thought somewhere there was something about width, is that,
Well, that is,
that's
yes.
the negative one.
No, that's not the negative one. Well,
Yeah, what?
so it's a separate agenda item that we have a.
Right, but it was
Public
brought
hearing.
to city council.
Right, as part of, yeah.
Right.
So this would basically limit anything on the bike path greater than 4.5 feet.
And that's the public hearing is set for?
Well, the public hearing, what I requested last time I was trying to explain, Joe, is that was part of a much broader amendment to ordinance that I had set, and my argument was that, well, can't we just vote on everything that's in there? Because what this whole discussion has brought up is a lot of things around operation of the Manhattan Rail Trail, and especially now with Valley Bike Share and electric bikes becoming more prevalent. I think it's really, and we can get to it whenever you guys want, although I'm only here for another hour, but I think it's important that we sit down and talk out a lot of things that this has brought up in terms of use of the rail trail. So, I mean, look, if you wanna send, if you wanna send this to the city council to consider, you know, I don't have a problem with that. Because ultimately the votes will be the votes, right?
I mean, I think if we went ahead and adopted this, restricted usage, which added a section B, then that would preclude anything that says if on the trail.
Well,
that would basically just take that out.
Yeah, before you do that though, I'd like to review this because it incorporates that into a much broader language.
Yeah, I'm fine to take a look at this.
Can I ask a question? To Councilor Connor's point, can you only submit one document to the full council?
No.
So, okay, so you could submit both sides or.
And bring them to a vote,
More.
and whoever gets the most votes wins.
Mm-hmm.
They vote on it separately.
Maybe vote on
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, can we do that?
I thought that's what we did last week.
Yeah.
Well, they're sort of, but what I was trying to argue is that I almost feel like they're two different things, because my intention with amending the rail trail is like a whole separate ball of wax that's been brought up, which I really.
Well, there isn't an urgency around this. There's an urgency around
this particular piece of it.
Like, this can be done whenever.
Well, we have a public hearing set for it. Is there any reason we can't do it?
No, my point being that the urgency,
There's
this is
one
what we
particular
were
piece
trying to
that
do
has
last
more.
week that never really happened,
Right.
is the public hearing would be around this.
But that one's not set yet, right? We had to send it back.
Well, it was sent back. I didn't know that we had to send it back, but we did.
I didn't have any part of that, just FYI.
Okay, whatever. So anyway, whatever.
Because I mean, I sort of
I
feel
lost
like,
my will to
I
live.
feel Nick needs an answer, and I think this
This
is
is
urgent.
the-
We
this
need-
is the-
we need
this
to
is the
take a
piece.
vote on this.
Right, but that's contained within.
Well,
But you have
Right.
to think about dividing all of
Just
it, which I think is valid, but I think there's no urgency, immediate urgency to it like this.
Right. This is why I pulled this piece out and said, this is, so when I brought this, and you weren't there,
No, I know.
this is the piece that I think is the most important thing for us to look at.
Right.
Which is a width restriction, which would then say there is no vehicle that is wider than 4.5 feet that can be on the Manhattan Rail Trail. And that would explicitly prohibit the pedal and party on the rail trail.
Okay, well, could you indulge me this?
Yeah, I'm fine to look at
Could
these
I go
things.
through the language right now, because this has been on our agenda for
Yeah.
2 months, and if there's significant objections, we could say, okay, we'll just move one thing forward, but, I cleaned up a lot of the language in this most recent, version, and I think it addresses a lot of things, including width, it addresses use of electric bikes, I mean,
Yeah.
it's up
I
to
mean,
you.
I already see an issue, but that's okay with the definition. But that's fine. But you know, I mean, it's the thing is like that's why the definition was so broad. It was because there's so many iterations of things that are considered bicycles.
Well, but the problem is there aren't, Salem, and
Well,
I went,
okay.
look, there's things that are considered human-powered and pedal-powered vehicles, right?
Yeah.
But part of the reason we got into this whole controversy in the first place is we had a definition of a bicycle, which wasn't a bicycle. Now, if you wanted to have, I understand your intention, right? If you wanted to have a definition of pedal-powered vehicles or human-powered vehicles, I think what we have now fits that more. But
Okay. So this, what I'm saying is this doesn't address this, which is a human-powered four-wheel vehicle.
Right.
Which, and the only reason I know about this is because I rented them when I was in New Orleans
No.
and with my family.
Yeah.
And used them on the
Oh,
bike
sorry.
path.
I know it doesn't.
Sorry.
Yeah. So
I know it doesn't.
So that would prohibit this, which this.
Well, it might not. It might not.
Okay.
It might not, because, so.
All right. So let's go
yeah.
through it and show me how it.
Okay.
Okay.
So first of all, I would implore you that we amend our definition of a bicycle, because in the research I've done, both in terms of at the state level, at the federal level, and then looking at neighboring cities as well as neighboring states, there is nowhere else in the world that defines a bicycle the way we have it defined. Now, that is not to say that we can't put in provisions for human-powered or pedal-powered vehicles, right? But I think that it creates confusion when I mean, I'll just read really quickly. Georgia, bicycle means every device powered by human power, which any person may ride, having only 2 wheels and are in tandem with each other. Texas, bicycle means a device that a person may ride is propelled by human power, has 2 tandem wheels, which at least one of which is 14 inches diameter. Florida, every vehicle propelled solely by human power and even motorized. But you get the gist. I think it's important in regards to where we have a lot of laws. So, for instance, Councilor Coniff just very thoughtfully redid our bicycle laws. If we now, there's a certain impression of what a bicycle is, especially when we're talking about road operation. 2 can ride abreast, right? If we're saying that a bicycle is a Surrey car, we can have 2 of those riding abreast on the street. I think it's important to carve out, to keep the bicycle laws, and if we want to talk about human-powered, pedal-powered devices, that's something we could talk about. Right. But we need to be careful about what we end up legislating in that regard, because, and that's where this whole width thing came in, basically, because you can have a pedal-powered vehicle tomorrow on Cottage Street that's 10 feet wide, and, well, it's a bicycle. So that's kind of more my thought. It's not to usurp the very, I think, thoughtful work you did on this in terms of trying to think about how we could legislate. It's more taking back bicycle stuff, especially when it pertains to, again, specifically their operation on roads. So that was my thought. And this is straight from federal regulations, you know, and I think it also kind of helps clarify a lot of things. So that was my thought.
Okay, as long as what we're not doing is unintentionally restricting the rail trail for things that we're not thinking of.
I'm a thoughtful person, and you'll
Okay.
see how I am. So
Okay.
I defined that. I defined that straight from.
I gotta run.
Thanks, Jude. I defined that straight from.
You guys are gonna get in the weeds, you don't even.
I defined that straight from federal regulations. Federal regulations 1512, which covers that. And what's really interesting to me about that too, is somehow electrical bicycles have come under the umbrella definition of bicycles, which I think helps us, because one thing that's made me really agitated about this whole discussion is the whole well, why is it okay to have an electric bike when otherwise motorized vehicles are excluded from the bike path? And it's this weird gray area where well, if that's okay, then this should be okay. And so this definition actually, to some degree, protects, I think, the use of electric bicycles on the bike path, because under federal regulations, they're actually considered what a bicycle is right now. So that's my thought with that. I got into the definition of electric bicycles, US Code 2085.
I'm sorry. Slow it down a little bit.
Okay.
So, number 2 in the definition.
Yes.
A 2- or 3-wheeled vehicle with fully operable pedals, what does that mean? They spin?
That they work to move a drivetrain.
Okay. And an electric motor of less than 750 watts, 1 horsepower. Okay. Whose maximum speed on a paved level surface when powered solely by a motor, when ridden by an operator who weighs 170 pounds, is less than 20. How do you verify that that hasn't been violated?
I don't know, but that comes straight from federal guidelines.
I know, but so does the chief have to weigh somebody to figure out if they're 170 pounds and they're going faster than 20 miles an hour?
I mean, I think that's a clever question, but again, my intention was to try to codify language that already exists.
Well, I'm just saying, we have to somehow create a process around which.
I mean, you could remove the weight thing. I don't have an objection to that.
Okay, go ahead.
I think it's important to define electric bicycles, because again, there's been a whole discussion here, and especially as it pertains to the operation of our Valley Bike Share bikes. This is a U.S. code that basically sets across the country the definition and regulations for electric bicycles, and there's a stipulation in that code too that you can create language and regulations that are more restrictive, but you can't have stuff that's less restrictive. So electric bicycles, 2 or 3 wheels, 750 watt electric motor. That's the important take-home message in terms of regulating those. I think that it's something that we need to be thoughtful about is how electric bicycles operate on the bike path, and I have language for that later, but generally my thought was that I think that to avoid the whole, and I talked to the chief about this too, so I have his blessing with this language, if it pleases you. I think that the whole use of an electric bicycle as basically an electric moped on the bike path is something we should try to avoid. Whether that would be ultimately enforceable, I don't know. But I think that we should intend that someone using an electric bike is using it for electric assist and nothing else, and the pedals should be operated. These classifications, like I said, these are all Mass Bike Coalition. They're also language that's been adopted by a bunch of states, as well as active language that's in a couple state bills right now. So here, the next page is probably the most important, Councilor Derby and Conniff. And so this kind of got to the root of, like, we were talking about, ignore that stuff on the top, that's kind of just like, that's more like about helmet stuff. We can go into that. There's this big discussion about what the rail trail should be used for and what that means. And I thought, well, why don't we legislate that? And so I created the scope statement, and basically this is taken right out of DOT language for mixed-use trails. So the Manhattan Rail Trail is a shared use path in accordance with Mass DOT specifications, and I can give you that language. It's designed for non-motorized use, which was basically language we already had, to accommodate a variety of users, including walkers, joggers, bicyclists, skaters, pets, and people with disabilities. Use of the path is intended for recreation, commuting, and local travel. And I think we got into this kind of philosophical discussion about what the Manhattan Rail Trail was intended for. I think this helps, both legislate it as well as kind of help make it clear. So, low speed electric bicycles, basically, I just say class 1, class 2, class 3 electric bicycles are much faster. Those are the ones where you can basically zoom around up to close to 30 miles an hour. With it just electrically, and I think that it would be my intention to keep things like that up top. I know, Councilor Derby, you and I have had discussions about this. And then I've made a restriction of the restriction thing, which is kind of what it comes down to with the width stuff. So I kept the language we already had, basically, but I expanded a little bit just to clarify. Electric and internal combustion motorized and motor vehicles are excluded from the use of the rail trail except what was already there. Electric bicycles operating solely in throttle mode only, so what we talked about. And then here's the width restriction. So this is 3-17-3C, and I'm happy to use the language you guys suggested too. I think it's fine. But vehicles occupying more than one lane's width as measured from the widest dimension of the vehicle in question, lane width to be determined as the edge of the paved surface to the nearest edge of the divider line. This does not apply to personal mobility devices, public safety or emergency vehicles, and official trail maintenance vehicles. So we could use, I think you used some more seasoned language in your thing. And then I wanted to also, since there was so much debate about what's electric assist and isn't, any other vehicle typically seen as human or muscle power but having a motor to operate, such as an electric two-wheeled recreational scooter. So these scooters are coming, and there's a lot of concern. I know I've had discussions with our planner about this, that any day now someone could drop off some of these electric line scooters and people will be zipping around on the rail trail. We're going to have the same discussion. Well, you can use them as a scooter, but they're motorized. And so I just thought that was just some thoughtful language to try to kind of like get ahead of that. And it also, so that was that. There's enforcement, which I think it was 125. I apologize for the 150. I think the current enforcement.
It's 125.
Yeah, it's 125. I don't know why I wrote 150. Maybe it's just inflation.
Yeah.
I put something in here for the divider line, because I think there was a lot of discussion about that too, about the intention of the trail to try to maintain two-way traffic. And I was trying to be thoughtful, because I think we kept coming back to that conversation that, again, as it pertains to overly wide vehicles, that the real intention should be that, people travel in the rightmost lane in a certain way, and you should try to stay in your lane, basically.
I do like that part. I question whether it would fit in within an ordinance. Like this, to me, seems like more of a policy that should be kind of stated by the man-hand rail trail somewhere on a sign.
Sure.
But like as far as enforcement, and as far as I mean, it's just like it's a good. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But does it make a lot of sense to be part of an ordinance side? That's the question that I think we should.
I don't know. There's
ask.
no enforcement for that either.
Right.
It's more of a guidance statement.
Yeah.
Provision for people with disabilities, just basically saying that we won't violate ADA standards with people using the trail. And then this undefined vehicle section basically saying that, and I don't remember the word that Councilor Coniff used, but if we wanted to say that something was a boogie buggy and it has either pedals or it's human powered, but it also has an electric assisted motor. Well, we can seek guidance and we can create these vehicles, but we want them to stay within the guidance of what we already have for electric assisted human type powered vehicles and stay within kind of the realm of US Code 25 in regards to how big that motor can be. So we don't get into a similar situation where we have a vehicle that has this huge electric motor on the trail that's more of a motor vehicle than it really is an assisted vehicle. So
And should this say output of 750 or more watts? Because wouldn't 750 or fewer watts include the other classifications of electric bikes?
yes,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
Yep.
And then I put in a line about commercial use, and again, this is all of these things are obviously food for thought. I think that we got into a discussion about should the Manhattan Rail Trail, which is a public way, be used for commercial use, and the answer to that is I don't know. But what I did do, which I thought was kind of a clever way of approaching this, was as of right now, if you want to basically take money to bring people on the Manhattan Rail Trail, you can't do that. But the city council can develop a permitting process in order to do that. And I left a section blank in order to create that if the council at large thought that that's something we wanted to do. I have concerns about that, but I thought that again, this maybe that's coming. Petty cabs and stuff like that.
I mean, I guess I have, I don't want to get us into the weeds on this, but I mean, I can see as my former profession, I took students on a 3-week mountain bike trip from Mount Sunapee to Northampton, and we used the Amherst section of the bike trail to get from the M&M trail to Northampton.
Right.
So I was being paid to guide those people. And I see when the rail trail is done, I see a pretty significant potential for groups to take people on a New Haven and Northampton bike adventure where they would stay and bed and breakfasts and I don't know is that because that would be prohibited. Those people would have to ride on the roads in Easthampton. Right,
and I also look, and again, it was just I wanted to, as you have maybe figured out by now, I like to try to put all the possibilities out there, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, and like is paying for and I mean so too, like you could potentially almost claim that the bike share bikes are paying like
because you have to pay.
I don't know. I wanted to put that out there. Just
I mean, I think it's not a bad idea. I think it might. It might be difficult to enforce if especially if you have like nebulous groups just riding through. Like for example, I pick up a group at the brewery and everybody pays $5 to be part of my running club and we go for a run on the bike path.
Yeah.
I mean that technically would be a commercial use. So I just don't like. I mean, I don't want to get us in a position where we're enticing people to break the rules that we're trying to make in order to create order. So I think this is one that we should pay a little attention to, try to figure out if there's a way that we can craft it so it's more specific, more easily enforceable. Like for example, prohibiting people from selling goods on the path, or and I think this is probably in somewhat relation to the pedaling part, like some people paying to go on the path. So this one's a little tricky.
No, I agree, and I thought of that while I was writing it, but I didn't want to not write it.
Right. Well, I mean, it's worth discussing.
Right.
I mean, that's an important thing to discuss.
Right.
Like, does the popsicle person riding down the bike path,
Yeah.
you know, or the I think I even saw they have like a bakery on the back of a bike.
Well, I thought about that, but that's just using
that's just
as a means of
transporting.
transportation. If obviously the popsicle person set up at the side
Set on
of
the
the
side
rail
of the rail trail.
Yeah, so
Right.
again, I wanted to, that one was more like, hey, this popped into my head, I want to put it out
No,
there.
and that's, I mean, it's important to think about those things, you know.
So,
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this stuff is good stuff that is worth, you know, I would say definitely the width piece, I'd say for now is probably one of the most important things. And I think that probably this language is a little bit more specific than this language.
mm-hmm.
And so I think as we look at ordinance, specificity is generally better as it relates to enforcement.
Right. Well, we can, if we just put that in.
I think we could easily just insert that.
Insert B into C.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was another. So enforcement. I feel like we gave the police the enforcement explicitly. Did you just not write that because it was already written down?
I didn't write it because I just wanted to make sure I slipped the enforcement thing in because I forgot it because I kind of rewrote the way the whole section was ordered, as you probably noticed.
Right. And I think if we, like, I like the idea of the divider line. I just feel like within an enforceable ordinance, it is more of a statement of proper use as opposed to something that would be enforceable or, you know, have a reason to live within a piece of legislation.
So so this came from, just to clarify, this did come from a. I'd have to try to find it, and I might not be able to find it now. But we have for our roads, we have a divider line language, and I was thinking, like,
Right.
well, that's really a nice thing to kind of grab and put in.
Sure. But then, you know, on the road, there's definitely more of a active presence of enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if you're driving the wrong way on the road, someone's probably going to notice.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think, Peg? What do you think about that part?
I'm inclined to leave it up to the Manhattan Rail Trail to communicate that in their literature
Right.
and or signage.
Like
you know,
appropriate use,
yeah,
like respect each other.
Right.
Well, there are signs there about saying to announce when you're passing and stuff like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, can I speak now?
Oh, please.
There are some areas that were repaved and they might not have the line in the middle.
There are some
Yeah.
sections, especially where they did the route mitigation.
Yeah, so they haven't redone lines in the middle, so
Mm-hmm.
that's a concern for
Yeah,
them.
true. And on the bridges, there's no lines.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, I think that piece we can put a question mark next to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I don't question its validity. I think that it's a valid point. I just don't know if it is necessary to have within the ordinance.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. It might be better for like signs that are up on the trail discussing like, and then, I mean, because if you put the width piece in, yeah.
And can I?
almost
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, no, go on.
The only other thing, I mean, that stood out to me would be, I feel that if the city wanted to allow a vehicle that we somehow were not able to define,
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily feel that we should be required to consult with the DOT or the RMV, which are less versed at dealing with things like multi-use trails. You know, their wheelhouse pretty exclusively is you know, vehicle traffic, you know, motor vehicles that go on highways and roads.
Mhm.
I would say if the city council felt like a vehicle made sense, then a vote of the city council would be sufficient.
That's fine.
So, okay, I didn't know. I mean, I know that you
Well,
put that in there.
Yeah, well, I put it in there again because I think that, I mean, this goes
it's
back to
not
my
a bad
original
idea, but
question about like really like where what powers do we have to regulate vehicles? And I don't know, but so yes.
okay. I mean, other than that, I think, you know, the only thing going back into, you know, so envisioning other vehicles, like I know that there are some people that have custom vehicles that are recumbent bikes that have 3 or 4 wheels that would meet the width restriction.
Yep.
And I don't know if we don't have them defined, does that inherently prohibit them?
No, because it's a non-motorized vehicle.
Right.
Right? I mean, done, right?
So,
I mean, you could put something in there about like human-powered vehicles, like a human-powered vehicle without an assisted motor or motorized method of propulsion is inherently allowed or something like that. But I think it's not motorized.
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, like that's it, right? I mean, I think like where you get into the weeds is like what we've done with this is like, well, it's got pedals.
With a scooter, you can scooter it,
right?
or
You can scooter it, right?
or
Exactly.
you can throttle it. I
Yeah.
mean, I was just looking on Amazon. They have like little mini boards and long boards that are you have a hand throttle.
Right. Yes.
And so.
I think that introduces an element of danger.
Well, yeah. I mean, well, these things are probably going to become more prolific.
And that's why I included that line, because I think that we can always go back. Like if electric scooters come here, we really want them, which I was in Raleigh and they were just like litter, the streets were just littered with them, but that's a whole other discussion that I have.
Yeah, I mean, they're all over Paris too.
I think this at least puts, because I talked to Jeff and like he's nervous about them. I think this like at least puts a stopgap in place to then if we really want to talk about some sort of permitting structure for these things, we can go back and do it or have broader language, because I know Chicopee has language specifically restricting them, and we can go back and write broader language. But at least this is like, okay, like no. So,
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think, Peg?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
All right, so I don't have a pen on me. Do you want to write up your remarks and I can type?
Yeah, I can do that.
And I will say, because I'm actually surprised you didn't say this, but I don't disagree with you that how are they going to enforce whether people are throttling down or pedaling? But I think that the point is that they can if they wanted to. And if the same person, say, blasts through, like I don't know why, but the thing that's always in my mind is that section between Union Street and Ferry. And I know that there's people who blast through there with electric bikes, like using like a moped. They don't pedal at all, they're just sitting back.
Right.
To me, that's not the intended use of the trail. And will they be enforced? I don't know, but if they come through there every day and someone calls the police and they're sitting there waiting for them and they get to enforce that, I think that's good.
Yeah.
And it's there's lots of things that happen that aren't enforced.
Yeah. That's why I didn't. I figured. I mean, there's like I know for a fact I know people that have throttle electric bikes in town.
Right.
And that use them on the bike path and they pedal too.
Well, that's different. So they're using it in assist mode.
Right.
So I think that's fine. And I asked the chief too. I'm like, do you have an issue with this? He's like, no, because I think it's showing intention. So, thank you for hearing me out.
Yep. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll
Can you just
consolidate my notes and
Yeah.
send them to you. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
that's
I mean,
So this is going to be modified somewhat. Now,
Yeah,
a little bit, yeah.
Were you going to add, because I know Owen mentions no more than sitting past half the trail or whatever, you mentioned that.
We're gonna take that language.
you take that language and put
I'm
this
gonna take what he
language
did
in.
and put that in
So
the.
this, not
section.
only will people be voting on definitions of bicycle, but in here will be their choice to say, yes, I think this should be on the mail trail or not. Because if you
Yeah.
vote for it, or
You
someone
say-
would make
You've
an amendment to remove it.
effectively restricted.
Right.
I mean,
Challenge.
yeah. I mean, we could do it.
A version with and a version without.
Yeah, someone could make an amendment to.
Or someone would make an
Remove.
amendment to remove it.
To remove.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Instead
I
of
can make an amendment for any of these things.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The only thing, but before, because I know that your time is a little bit limited.
No, I'm good, man. I got
Okay.
20-ish minutes. I'm just gonna walk across the street.
The commercial use piece.
Right.
Can we just dig into that a little bit? And see
Yeah.
if we can.
It's something I've just been thinking about, and I think also all the things you said, I totally agree. If someone's like having a bike tour or stuff, what's in my head is like almost like you can't get on the path unless you pay me type of thing. Like, and that's the type of stuff where I want to avoid because it's a public path. So like, if someone wanted to lead a, I don't know, that's what's in my head.
Right.
I don't know how to legislate that. And I don't know if any of you want to legislate that, but I was...
Well, I'm almost thinking, like, because...
Why don't we forget the sentence, may not be used as? Why don't we just leave, the city council may develop a permitting process for use of the manhand rail?
I like that.
Yeah,
I like
that sounds
that.
good.
I like that.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, here's what I was thinking. I was like, what if some industrious teenager, like, is saying, you know what, there's people that are going to the breweries that want to go into town for dinner. I'm going to weld myself this cool little bike that is 4.5 feet wide, and I'm going to ride it, and they can pay me $5 to bring them into town.
Well, to be clear,
Pedicab.
all along, I've been all for that. I mean,
Right.
I had conversations a few years ago with the Mill Pond Live people because I'm like, the bike path is a great opportunity to get people different places in town. So
Yeah.
I'm not against commercial use. I'm more like,
We
want
just
to be
don't
fun.
want we don't want unfettered use of
Correct.
the path for commercial use.
Yes.
I
I think
that.
pedicabs would be awesome.
Yeah.
I'd love to park my car at the Dollar Store Plaza.
Right.
Well, or 50 Payson because that's a private parking lot.
Right.
But 50 Payson to walk to the trailhead at Union Street and take a ride down to the mills. I mean, that would be great. So as long
Take it
as
to work every day.
And you know, and here's one other thing, and one of the reasons, and I didn't articulate this yet, but I think it's important. You know, as we look at becoming more sustainable, you know, one of the things that Northampton has that we don't quite have yet is the pedal people, and you know that is a commercial use of the rail trail, and I think it's a fine use. You know, if we're looking at like increasing our sustainability, decreasing our footprint.
yes.
And I think that with the 4.5 foot restriction, they should, you know, if someone
They
wanted to do
fit.
something, they would be fine.
Yeah.
But that particular clause would prohibit them from going to pick up people's trash. And
Right.
Well, it's sort of.
They
Although,
are in Easthampton.
How people have come to Easthampton?
They're both composting, and they just started this year
That's
to
good.
come for trash and
That's really
composting.
good.
yeah, well, that's right.
We should
Yeah,
pin in this. We should we should encourage the mayor to look at putting recycling containers in town
yeah.
and having them pick them up.
Show you like to do that. I've
Well,
been thinking.
hold on.
I've been
Can I
thinking.
show you? Wait,
Yeah.
this is.
They
I want to
come in
show
my,
you.
the pedal people come on my street.
I also think,
I've
I think
actually been doing research on this.
Well, actually, we don't have this on the. Yeah. Yes.
See?
If someone should introduce that to the agenda so we could discuss
I've
it,
seen them somewhere.
Then
right?
I'm sorry, what?
Someone should introduce that to the agenda so we
I'll
can
do
actually
it.
discuss it here.
I'll do it.
I'm just saying that we can't right now.
Yeah, you're right.
So are we gonna run into trouble? I'm so confused with what the document is that we're saying public hearing for. Can we address
Come on, Joe,
this?
try
Or
to
is this gonna
stay
be too,
focused.
or is this gonna be too broad to say it's the same thing?
This was already
this
on.
is it.
This was on our
This is the
agenda.
public hearing.
This is what it will
That's
be.
what I was trying to say last time. I think
Yeah.
like something got lost in translation.
Yeah, this was already on.
No, the other one got set for September though, is that correct? Because we had to send this
I
back
didn't
to.
think we
think
had
so.
to.
Alright,
We
so we'll
just
set
had-
it in August.
We just had this
Right.
for September.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, this
That's
is
for
August.
August, then
And
we're good.
I think we were told that we had to send back that because it needed
And now we're
more.
rejecting
The
it.
part that's underlined right there.
Are we?
Yeah,
That's this.
Why?
Consider several amendments.
The two are mutually exclusive.
no, but I'm talking about a public hearing.
Yeah.
I don't mind
So
something
This
being
was
a free
this was
hearing.
what should have
Well,
been for the public hearing.
Whether you
Should
mind
have
or
been
not, I don't know
I
that
think
it's
you always-
relevant
I mean, there has to be
anymore.
a document.
Well, what about the
For
roads?
the public hearing,
Mhm.
so
About
make sure the document was
roads.
close enough that it wasn't like Barb's gonna
This
say. it's
and the
two
roads?
different-
Okay.
That
Oh,
doesn't
right.
exclude, creating a width restriction on the bike path doesn't exclude having a discussion about operation on the road.
No.
I'm not.
I mean, that's fine.
Yeah, no,
Are
I mean,
are we voting on this tonight? Or
no,
we're-
I don't think we.
This will go forward back to city council?
It will go forward back.
Go forward back.
That will.
This will go forward.
This.
Well, I
This.
It would be nice to have a document come out of the committee, amended or not, that's so hopefully similar to what's having, so you could say this committee voted 2-0, 3-0,
Oh,
whatever.
I see, for the public
If they-
hearing.
Yeah, for the public
So we
hearing.
can set a public hearing for
And
the
then people
other
can make an
thing.
amendment, yeah, and then.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion for the amendments to the rail trail regulations with the incorporation of the input I got from Councilors Coniff and Derby,
Okay.
to move that that will be the document that we send to the public hearing scheduled for August 7th.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
So just send me those, I'll type it up.
So they're just amendments you guys just discussed.
Yep.
Correct.
Like that.
And then, look, if you guys want to agree to send for full council, because at the end of the day, I think the issue is the full council has to vote on something.
Yeah.
If you want to send,
I think if we send this, that, I mean, if we take out use of rail trail, if we just take out the pieces where it says being used on the rail trail, I mean, at least we're making an effort
I agree.
to try to, you know, regardless of concerns and whatnot, to try to accommodate and be mindful of a potential opportunity that is happening in many places around the country. By the way, I found one place where they do use it on a bike trail.
Where?
It's in Venice Beach.
Oh.
It's a wide trail, but it is a bike trail. And
Is it wider than ours?
It's wider than ours.
Yeah. I mean,
But they have like, you know, it's a whole company that runs like 12 of them.
so my question then is so let's say you send this to the council and they vote no.
Well,
What
then
does that mean?
it just means that there's no regulations guiding the operation.
So it's status quo.
Status quo.
So may I ask if we send both? Because in case there are a majority of members who want to just basically vote on an ordinance to restrict
Can't
outright.
vote
Well, we can't vote on this
here.
one because we have to set a public hearing for it.
Right.
So I'm fine to. Now here's the crux. I tried to change my flight because you yelled at me last time. I get back the day after our meeting in August. So I'm gone.
Okay.
So, but I mean, which is fine for this. I feel like
Yeah.
this one is.
That's the most important.
If you want to set a public hearing for that in August,
I think
September,
for September.
for September, at the end of the day, what happens is if it either
Either passes or
either
doesn't.
has a pass or it doesn't. Now,
Or people put in amendments to it, or
well, and theoretically, this whole thing could be introduced as an amendment.
right.
I mean, that's the
Right.
So, look, I don't want to.
And even if we do set a public hearing for it, you know, as long as we don't materially change the content, we can work on like some small structural stuff. It doesn't, just because a public hearing has been set does not mean that we cannot work on it. I don't know if you guys know that.
And you can't, and so I have to resubmit this if I wanted to have it be considered?
You'd probably have to put it
Yeah.
to get it on our agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, and set the public hearing if we wanted to.
Yeah.
Because the question is, do we want to offer basically two versions, one that's specifically
I mean,
for the
that-
roads?
I feel like if we,
Or do we want to wait, see if that gets voted down and we go back?
I
and
feel like
discuss
if
more?
we see what happens with this, like if we, so what I can do is I can craft this to take out the pieces that would grant it authority on any sort of trail
Mhm.
other than the road, and change the permitting authority.
Mhm.
I think if we did that, then we can say to the council, is this something that you feel comfortable with, yes or
Right.
no? It would put restrictions on an operation like this.
Mhm.
If we don't, there are no restrictions on the operation.
Well, that defers back to.
What defers back
enforcement of
to, you know, whatever,
The chief wants to do.
And
Yeah.
future law issues that
and
may
if anything happens in
happen.
the state level or whatnot.
Yeah.
Right, and then if we want to basically then, if the implicit statement then is, if it is a no vote, if the implicit statement is that the council then wants to restrict, we can introduce a more
restrictive.
specific. Sure, I'm fine with that,
Okay.
if you guys.
So let's do that. So, and would you mind setting the public hearing for this for September?
Of course.
Are you gonna be there? You're gonna be there.
Yes.
Do you not trust me?
If you
No, I
come
didn't.
back, if you come back from it, anyway.
You're right.
I know.
It's dicey.
Well, I wasn't supposed to miss last meeting. We changed the meeting from the 3rd to the 10th.
Yeah.
That screwed me up, so. Anyway, okay, I think
You guys
that's
have
it.
anything? No?
Good. Annette?
So this is the September public hearing.
This would be September.
This is
And-
the
That's
August,
August.
and this
And-
is introduced in the next meeting for a potential
For
public hearing
potential-
in September
Now we,
as well.
Yeah.
now we have, oh, okay, yes, I thought you were
You have to
saying.
give it to Barb first.
Okay.
Is it
Right.
significantly different? I mean,
What would you like
It's
me
a
to do?
whole-
Would you like
it's a
me to
whole-
hold off on submitting?
Why don't you hold off on that now? Let's
Right.
see how this goes, and if people feel like they want to be more restrictive, then we can go to
Okay,
this.
I'm totally fine with that. I think it's collaborative and, now, we still have time, if we set the public hearing for September, we still have time during
To work
August
on
to
it.
work on that.
Yep,
Sure.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. So, and like I said, if we set a public hearing, it doesn't mean we can't work on it.
I mean, I'm not in favor of the roads, but that doesn't mean I'm not gonna help in crafting language for something that the council can vote on.
But,
So.
and
but I-
creating a map.
Did the chief ever respond to our road question? Did he ever respond to it, really? No.
I think he said it was dependent on like the time and
Oh.
the roads, the specific roads.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, I mean, honestly, I'll be really honest, I don't think it would work on any other roads than the roads that I said. Like, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think that literally is the only route.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
I think Cottage Street, Union Street,
I
Main
know.
Street, Pleasant Street, I think they're all
They're all out.
disasters.
I mean,
yeah.
the one section from Lovefield, Pleasant to Ferry, would be since it has a very wide shoulder, that could be the one, like, main road exception, because it could be completely in the shoulder.
My recommendation is actually to rename it the Clap Street Express, and it just goes up and down.
How about
that
just a
street.
clap express?
Yeah.
Okay.
I love feel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, I wonder, I mean, the vehicle that Nick has probably would not be safe to be on the roads, but we're saying there could be another more, because the
No.
ones that are on the roads in Nashville are not that small.
No, I think they are.
They're about the same size. I mean, that goes back to the whole question. I mean, I have concerns about its inherent safety in regards to. He said there were seatbelts. I don't remember.
There are not.
No, he said
He
there
would
are options.
fit
He would put that.
He would put them on there.
Oh,
But he has
those
yet to
seats.
do
I mean,
that.
I can imagine hitting a pothole and falling off.
And
that
dangling
thing.
from the seat.
Oh yeah, I mean that's my worry on the roads, especially if they're uneven. Like,
Right.
and it's
I mean, to be fair, like, if you do look at and this is just because I've looked at way too many of these stupid pedal tavern research.
I've done no research on this at all.
Well, but there's literally no recorded incidents of people like hitting a pothole and falling
Right.
off.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know.
But there
So-
are recorded incidents of cars hitting
Yeah,
them
so
and bodies flying up in the air.
And that is true. There's two, but those are both drunk drivers in congested downtown.
Well, and that's what I'll say too is like I think part of the crux of this too is like this is uncharted territory. Like
Right.
nowhere else are these things like
Right.
going down country roads. Like I don't know
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
that's
Because
so.
it's a two-edged sword, because congested people are gonna have to go slower. Open
Right.
roads, people are gonna think, I can go faster. I mean, it's
Yeah.
almost like a two-edged sword there.
Yeah, and if they pass them and they clip one, I don't know. It's fun.
And that's why I thought Springfield was nice, because they have a
This is for
dedicated
you.
bike,
I think I have.
Yeah.
park.
Extra,
Right.
And it's
extra,
Yeah.
extra.
That's super like-
Okay,
are we
so
Yeah.
wait, so we voted on that,
Yeah.
and do we need to, so I'll make a motion that we'll set the public hearing and to continue deliberations on the other piece. We'll set the public hearing for September.
Yep.
And with plans to continue to deliberate and refine that language.
And then you'll introduce,
If,
The other
yeah, we don't have to make a motion on that, I think that's.
No, we don't.
understood.
Not yet.
no, but I mean, you should get it
Oh.
into Barbara.
sure.
So we can
So it's at
move
least
it
here.
back
So
to
it's
here.
there.
Okay, sure.
Because it's not a thing yet.
Yeah, so I don't have to introduce that per se.
Yeah.
So is there a 3-0 vote for that? I can't remember. Did
Well,
we-
we
No,
did- we did.
that one was a 3-0,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
we still need a second on this one
Right.
to set the public hearing
Okay.
For, which-
for the actual
Confusion.
ordinance for September.
I will make a motion to set the September hearing for the quadricycle thing.
Oh, wait, okay.
We already-
So we have two first motions, I'll second that.
Okay, all right. Two motions on the floor, but one seconded.
Oh, did
so
you already make
that's
one?
I
okay.
did, but I defer to you.
All
when it
those
comes
in
to
This
making
conversation
motions.
All those
is
in favor?
very
Yeah.
circuitous right now.
Yeah. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, good.
All right, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.